So Dylan Gabriel is, of course, off to Oregon. And I made a post just a few days ago because it's rather astounding that if he turns in the same season this year that he did last year, he will set the all time touchdown and yardage records in college football. He will be the all
Wow.
time leader in career yardage and touchdowns.
Wow, that's crazy to think about. But yeah, I'm trying to remember. So this will be his. So he was at UCF for 3 years,
Yeah.
correct? Then at Oklahoma for two, and Oregon for here. I mean, I know that 1 year in UC that his third year at UCF before transferring to Oklahoma, his season was cut after about 3 or 4 games, right? But yeah, there's not really. I think it's interesting. We've thought about this. Or I've talked about this in other sports, particularly like softball, but from a football perspective as well, we're getting towards the end of the whole COVID extra year type of thing. So I think Gabriel had the issue with he did have the extra COVID year plus that redshirt year as well. So yeah, 6 years in college now.
Yeah, so he certainly will not be setting the record in regards to average yards or touchdowns per game, but the
Right.
the COVID exemption certainly has set up Dylan Gabriel to be the all-time leader um, in college football, having played at three schools. Okay, what is left is Jackson Arnold, obviously, who we got to see in the Alamo Bowl against Arizona. We saw a lot of good. We saw a few mistakes with three interceptions in a turnover plagued game and 361 yards passing, but all eyes are on Jackson Arnold.
They are, Mark, and I think it's a little bit interesting. I mean, to bring up Gabriel because I don't know that it was necessarily a situation where Gabriel was pushed out the door, but I think the writing on the wall was that I think there was a lot of interest within those walls to have the Jackson Arnold era begin for Oklahoma. So be that as it may, you're right. Jackson Arnold's first, not completely atypical for a true freshman, especially in a bowl situation where you've got so many different not really holdouts, but people that aren't playing to get ready for the draft and things like that. So it was a little bit of a makeshift offensive line, makeshift team to be fair. But yeah, there was a lot of good. I think there was, he threw for over 300 yards, a couple of touchdown passes, but there was a couple of, as you mentioned, a couple of interceptions, 3 interceptions to be exact. Couple of fumbles. Oklahoma was not clean with the ball in that game. 6 turnovers overall in the game, and still almost won the game. Right, lost by single digits to Arizona in that game. But yeah, I think it's interesting. The offense, I think, between the quarterback play and between the offensive line, I think that's going to be the key thought, and we'll get into this a little bit more. But I think the skill position players, I think, are good. I think I would say that they're SEC level good enough, like they're good enough to compete at that level. It's just going to be kind of the quarterback play and the offensive line. So, I mean, I would assume once you go in and honestly, spring wasn't good. I mean, and I think from the perspective of the offensive line was even more makeshift than probably what it will be going into fall camp. There was a lot of those kids that they held out due to injuries, and so he went through kind of a lot of situations where he just didn't have enough time. Whether it was in the spring game or whether it was in some of their scrimmages that they had in the spring, just really didn't have enough time. And part of a young kid is really kind of learning to read defense, understand coverage, things like that. And he really just wasn't afforded the time. So I don't know that I would go so far as to say it was really kind of a wasted spring for him, but I think that's part of it. And that's one of the things that offensive coordinator Seth Luttrell had mentioned in a luncheon that they had with all the coaches, that a big area for him this year, and particularly this summer, is his ability to learn defenses, learn coverages, and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's for for a kid that's making will be making his second career start when Oklahoma kicks off against Temple on August 31st. It's August 30th, I guess I should say. It's going to be one of those things where he'll get it. It's good to have Temple. It's good to have some of those games that they have in front of them before Tennessee to get his feet wet, so to speak, a little bit. But the measurables are there. Like when you look at true measurables in terms of arm strength, what he's able to do with his feet, he's probably got that level, maybe a little bit better than Gabriel, right? Just from a measurable perspective. But I think what's going to be interesting to see how that kind of manifests through the season is, his ability to read coverages, his ability to understand where the blitzes are coming from, and things like that too, as they get into the season.
So it sounds like Oklahoma's decision to somewhat nudge Dylan Gabriel out the door in favor of Jackson Arnold was twofold. One would be that, to your last point, if Jackson Arnold fulfills his potential, he has a higher ceiling than Dylan Gabriel. And coaches are typically enamored with, for as much as they are conservative by nature, on one hand, to think, okay, we don't want mistakes. We want to limit mistakes because more games are lost than are won. On the other hand, uh, coaches are typically have enough confidence or ego in them to think, um, I can take the best player, the most talented player, the one with a higher ceiling, and I can coach the mistakes out of them, and I can coach them, and they can reach their potential under me. And then obviously there's the experience factor or the eligibility factor of having Jackson Arnold for multiple seasons versus this would have been a last go for Dylan Gabriel. So
Yeah,
makes
and
sense both ways.
yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think, I mean, the writing was on the wall when Levy left, right, for the coaching job. And I think, and it wasn't completely because Levy was the offensive coordinator here, but he was a big factor in getting Dylan over here. So I think just from a fan base perspective, Mark, it's interesting. I think there was a lot of so not this past year, but the year before, there was a lot of key turnovers and key moments in games where Oklahoma lost a lot of those one possession, 3 point, 7 point games. And so I think there was a lot of, and again, for Oklahoma fans alike and people that cover Oklahoma and watch Oklahoma football, we've even talked about this. Any quarterback is going to be compared, fair or otherwise, or is going to be compared to Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray. And I think after that first year, he was probably in most people's minds well below that expectation. But I think then you look at last year, and I think particularly it happened with in Texas. He probably had his best game as an Oklahoma Sooner against Texas in that game. Played mistake-free football, did not turn the ball over. Was really good with his legs, made really good decisions, made a lot of clutch throws late in that game for Oklahoma to win that game. And then I think the change I think happened in a lot of people. Okay, this is a guy that has clearly improved from year one to year two, but I think also he's a guy that Oklahoma probably wanted to keep, and things like that. But it's a balancing act, I think, right? When you have these ballyhooed freshmen that come in, and with the transfer portal and just kind of the mentality, I think, of some of these kids nowadays that aren't willing to wait more than a year to get their spot. I think the probably behind closed doors, the conversation was, okay, I know we want Dylan to come back to be a part of this team, but at the same time, what does that do to Jackson Arnold? Does he potentially want to look elsewhere? So I think it was one of those, like I said, I don't know that they necessarily pushed him out the door, but I think it was one of those things with where Dylan was kind of considering what he was going to do, and then Jeff Lebby had decided to move on, and felt like that he was ready to move on as well. So then obviously then the Jackson Arnold era started last year in the Alamo Bowl.
And Jason, even though nobody wants to see Jackson Arnold on the sideline during any kind of meaningful snaps, they would love to see the backup quarterbacks because Oklahoma's up by 4 touchdowns. But Casey Thompson is not a bad backup. You get a guy that's led the Big 12 in touchdown passes. He's been at a couple major stops, and there's some insurance there that if they need to make it from week 5 to week 8 because there's a minor injury to Jackson Arnold or something like that, that he can keep them above water.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think that was a key get in the portal for Oklahoma from a backup perspective, because obviously with Dylan being gone and Jackson as the full time starter, and Oklahoma had a couple of defections in that quarterback room from a portal perspective as well, was very key for him. And you're right, he's a guy that's dependable. Played really well in this game against Oklahoma a few years ago. Um, 52 touchdown passes for his career. So a guy that's, to your point, Mark has been through it, has been through the ringer. Didn't have a great year last year at Florida Atlantic. Got injured early on in the year and was done for the remainder of the year. But yeah, I think he's a guy that you can have come in. Now I say that, but I say Michael Hawkins, true freshman, coming in as well, was in the spring, and heard this from Gabe Eichert that covers Oklahoma. He said the most impressive true freshman that he's ever watched. And he caveated that comment to a degree. Like, okay, I'm not saying that he's going to come in and be your day one starter, but I think he's probably a little bit more ready than most people would think. So I think that'll be a really interesting battle, Mark, and fall camp between those two, because I mean, I think you got Casey Thompson, as we've talked about, he's a fifth year senior. He's been through it. He knows what big time college football is all about, playing at Texas for a few years, being at Nebraska. Um, but um, but Michael Hawkins, like I said, comes from a good family, turned a lot of heads. Um, you know, may not necessarily have been the most ballyhooed recruit, as you mentioned. He was only a 3-star guy here, um, from a 247 perspective, but certainly a guy that will be that will be able to, I think, challenge for that backup role, and it'll be an interesting battle in fall camp.